In my opinion, very few franchises have been able to carve a niche into popular culture with the same impact as Ghostbusters. When I watched the original 1984 film, it did not even feel like I was watching a movie, you know? The cast was not playing the part of Ghostbusters, they were the Ghostbusters. That kind of effortless chemistry and heart is rarely seen in cinema today, unfortunately. Since then, the franchise has experienced ups and downs, but fans have never stopped loving Ghostbusters. We have even seen it creep up into other popular works across TV and film, and that speaks volumes about just how phenomenal it is. Now, with an upcoming animated series in development along with rumors about new film projects, the excitement among fans is very real. Ghostbusters lives on, and you, my friend, are at the right place if you want to know exactly what is cooking behind the scenes. Let's get started. How the 1984 film almost looked completely different, and why it still defines everything today. It sounds really easy to say that the 1984 Ghostbusters movie was an amazing example of great cinema, because that is stating the obvious. And in 2026, after 42 years of its release, it has become a classic. I know that our topic of discussion today is the animated series and other possible future releases, but I really want to stress why the original film is the blueprint that everyone should be looking back at. This is not just nostalgia or appreciation of that piece of work. Any new Ghostbusters project inevitably has to live in the shadow of the 1984 film. Have you ever thought what exactly it represented back in the 80s itself, when no one had any idea that the film would blow up? Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd were in their early 30s, and director Ivan Reitman was just 37. Saturday Night Live was less than a decade old, but its particular brand of comedy had started to take root in Hollywood through other releases such as The Blues Brothers and Animal House. But Ghostbusters still felt like a stranger gamble, because it mixed studio comedy with expensive supernatural effects, horror imagery, and a premise that could have easily sounded ridiculous on paper. But when Columbia gave Ghostbusters the go-ahead, no one, not even Murray, Aykroyd, or Reitman, could have expected what was to come. This was not safe comedy. Every aspect of the production involved risks, and the movie itself was full of the kind of imagery that we might experience after a few special munchies. It was nonsensical, it was funny, and it could have bombed big time. Instead, people of all ages loved it so much that the Ghostbusters theme became one of those tunes that you hum without even being aware that you are humming. Most comedy films do not include big special effects because of the assumption that doing so will make them cheesier and less comic. Ghostbusters was not having any of that. They wanted to go big or go home, and maybe it did not become as big a box office success as Star Wars, but that comparison is really not fair. It created a ripple effect just as impactful and opened the doors in Hollywood for more creative filmmakers to place their bets. Reitman has stated how it was always his dream to create a film that would combine comedy, horror, and science fiction. When he first read the script that Aykroyd had written for himself and John Belushi, he found it to be a sort of futuristic thing, and it was competing groups of Ghostbusters and out in space. However, Aykroyd has said it never went to outer space. That's Ivan's misinterpretation. It went to inner space. He then brought up superstring theory and a dozen dimensions that I hope any physics geek in the comics can explain to me. But here's the interesting bit. Dan's fascination with the paranormal came partly from his family background, including relatives interested in spiritualism and psychical research. That is how Ghostbusters was born. Let's do a comedy ghost movie, but let's base it on the real research. From that, I wrote a script, which is much darker than what was seen and less accessible, he has mentioned. His original script was very hard to translate to the big screen, so it was Reitman who proposed to make it more Earth-centric and set it in New York, because in his words, Manhattan was the best-known city in America, and that was just the first step. Setting a budget and negotiating with the studio is probably one of the most difficult stages in any production, and these guys did not even have a solid plan. They simply did a rough calculation considering the budget of Stripes as their base, and mentioned a number that the studio surprisingly said yes to without any hesitation. This $30 million was a lot in the 80s, even though other films were being made with bigger budgets. But for a comedy movie, it was a pretty significant amount. Joe Medjuck, associate producer for Ghostbusters, had said how 1941 was the last big-budget comedy film that did not do well, and people were dissuaded from the idea because even Spielberg can't make a big-budget comedy work. It is also noteworthy that the visual effects were done by Richard Edlund, who had also worked on Return of the Jedi. Even he was shocked after after reading the 180-page script. Ultimately, Ghostbusters went on to be nominated for Best Visual Effects at the Academy Awards, along with Best Song. Anything I say about the film's cultural impact will pale in comparison to the fact that in 2015, it was added to the National Film Registry. The U.S. Library of Congress selects only the films that have particular cultural, aesthetic, or historical significance for this honor. This is why that movie continues to define everything that has been done with the franchise to date, and the Netflix animated series will also be built on its back. I assure you, I am not the only one going into the details of what was done back then. You better believe that the people at Sony are doing just that on a much, much bigger scale. So what is the new animated series exactly? Back in June 2022, Netflix and Sony Pictures Animation announced that they were developing an all-new Ghostbusters animated series, which will be available for streaming exclusively on Netflix. Ghost Corps Incorporated will be attached with the production as well, with Jason Reitman and Gil Kenan as executive producers. This series will be part of the extended Ghostbusters universe that can be traced back to the 1984 film, and most recently, Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire. We are not yet sure whether this will be a continuation of the older Ghostbusters cartoon, or if it will directly be part of the live-action universe. The real Ghostbusters ran from 1986 to 1991, with 140 regular episodes, while related Slimer material brings some counts higher. This show continued the adventures of the original characters from Reitman's movie. Following this, Extreme Ghostbusters aired in syndication in 1997 for 40 episodes, and while the team was led by Egon Spengler, here we mostly saw newer characters. According to Sony, the new animated series is set to be released on Netflix in 2027, but we have no other confirmation regarding the plotline, characters, or voice actors involved with it. No release date has been announced either. Who's really steering Ghostbusters now? Sony has officially also stated that Ben Heben, Elliott Callan, who is reportedly also the co-writer and showrunner, Amy Karp, and Dan Aykroyd are attached as executive producers as well, along with Reitman and Kenan. Ghost Corps Incorporated was founded in 2015 specifically to work on expanding the Ghostbusters universe. Now, I know the 2016 Paul Feig reboot was controversial at the very least, but Afterlife did undo a lot of that damage, even if it cannot exactly be compared to the first film. We saw the original team pass on the baton to the new generation, which was a nice touch to signify that a new era has been ushered in for this franchise's existence, and it gave us an idea that all upcoming projects will now focus on newer storylines. In 2024, Dan Aykroyd was interviewed by the New York Post, and when he was asked if the fellow stars from the original film would come back for future installments, he did not sound very optimistic. He specifically said, "I don't see that coming. I don't see where they would need us to carry it on. They've got a whole new cast, and they've got whole new ideas. I think probably they're going to move on to advancing it beyond the originals." Which they should. I think he was trying to get the point across to those who had criticized Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, where we saw newcomers McKenna Grace and Paul Rudd, along with the original cast in supporting roles only. I mean, I will not say it was a great movie either. Afterlife was definitely a better watch because this felt like more of a nostalgia grab with too many things happening at once. Anyway, Gil Kenan has specifically said that he and Jason Reitman take the responsibility and the joy of being the keepers of the flame of Ghostbusters very seriously. So they are pretty much the guardians of Ghostbusters now, for the animated show as well as any other project that comes up on the big screen. Aykroyd has suggested that future films probably do not need to rely on the original cast, and if the old guard appears again, it will likely be in a supporting capacity only. I would like to see them back, obviously, but we will have to be a little realistic here. There is no way any franchise can expand if it keeps using the same characters and the same hook. The challenge is to do things well, even if they do not exactly go by the book. Unfortunately, that is easier said than done. Why has this series taken so long to materialize? You must be wondering why it has taken nearly 4 years to get confirmation from the stakeholders on the animated series, even though it was announced way back in 2022. The thing is, it was not exactly shelved all this time, or stuck in development hell as such. It took nearly 2 years for the show to receive official confirmation from the studio and the streaming service, following the 2022 announcement. This delay does make sense when you factor in how Kenan and Reitman were also involved in the live-action sequels during that time, so they probably just sealed the deal initially and then came back to work on it later with fresh minds. In 2024, Keenan's comments regarding the Netflix show were, "It's very exciting. I just watched an entire presentation for the show. I've seen the sets and the environments, and I just saw my first glimpse of a world of supernatural characters as realized by our brilliant creative team." He also pointed out that the work was being done, with scripts being written and art being created, and that the show was in full development. And you know me, I would rather have these people take another year or so and perfect their vision before going ahead with the release, because for a franchise as beloved as Ghostbusters, they really cannot afford to be cutting corners in any way. Sony Pictures Animation also has a reputation to uphold, and with the recent slew of animated releases on Netflix, Devil May Cry, Castlevania, and Blue Eye Samurai, expectations from this Ghostbusters series will naturally be very high. What else is coming beyond the series? I will highlight this right away. Everything that I say now is not going to count as official news. There is a lot floating around online, and believe me, some of it looks too convincing not to be real. So I am going to exercise caution and clearly tell you if something is just rumored. The animated show on Netflix is happening. Yes, that is a no-brainer. But as I mentioned just a while back, Keenan has dropped some pretty significant hints that there will be a lot more to come on the big screen as well. He did not specify exactly what this entails, whether it means the show itself will have multiple seasons, or if we are getting a couple more live-action films. Deadline has heard from industry insiders that Sony and Netflix are working together on yet another animated film for the franchise, which is separate from the show they are making together. All we know is that this animated feature is in its early stages, and there has been no official announcement about a production, characters, storyline, or release. Chris Pern, who was the director and co-writer of the animated comedy The Willoughbys 2020, is reportedly attached to direct this movie. Once again, this has not been confirmed by any official source, so we should treat it as a serious trade report rather than an official announcement. More recently, Jeff Snyder also discussed this in a podcast with John Rocha. He said that the working title of this film is Ecto, and it is quite unconventional because it will be narrated from the perspective of the ghosts. Sam Jarvis from Dollface is reportedly writing the screenplay for Ecto. Gil Keenan earlier spoke about bringing in the influence of other cultures, and how they perceive ghosts as well for the future projects that are in the pipeline. So if these reports pan out, we can expect a little more diversity and lore building from whatever is going to be released next. Has franchise baggage made these new projects harder to launch? Earlier I said that one of the reasons behind these new projects getting delayed is that Reitman Keenan had to focus on Afterlife and Frozen Empire. But I cannot just ignore the fact that the Ghostbusters franchise is not what it used to be. And I am not saying that the 1984 film is what we should aim to reproduce, because that is not really possible. As the first movie of the franchise, that one had the element of surprise, and a mad creative team behind it. Even if we had the same people involved today at that scale, new releases would not have matched the original. And that is okay. Fans are not expecting perfection. The reception of Afterlife shows this very clearly, that we are okay with newer concepts as long as they are done well, and pay homage to the OG characters. The 2016 reboot was probably the lowest point of the franchise, but a lot of that was unwarranted hate. Before it was even released, people flooded comments and discussions with how having an all-female cast was being too woke, or an example of double standards aimed at the erasure of the original work. And it is absolutely fair to criticize any movie for what it really lacks after people have watched it, which happened with this one as well. The comedic timing was not in sync, the special effects were not as meaningful, and most importantly, the movie was just too long and ran out of substance. These are legitimate issues, but the way people just came at it before even watching the entire thing screamed Mean Girl vibes. Columbia got the hint, and Ghostbusters decided to move away from the reboot concept. However, even Frozen Empire, which was made with a considerable budget of $100 million, received quite the lukewarm acceptance. Technically, the latter did not bomb at the box office, but those numbers should also be matched to its immediate predecessor, which earned similarly around $200 million, but was also made on a much lower budget of $75 million. And one of the main complaints people had about Frozen Empire was that it relied too much on nostalgia and just sort of hoped that would carry the film ahead. It is good to have some references to the older films, and have some of those actors come back in smaller roles. But if the entire plotline is dependent on the audience just reliving the past, that is not a great plan for a franchise trying to expand itself, as I have repeatedly said. These last few releases may be part of the baggage that has made newer projects move more carefully, because the people involved do not want to risk anything anymore. The change in pace from live-action films to an animated Netflix show could also mirror this pressure. It is left to be seen how the creative team handles this by taking all previous criticism into account. What still hasn't been announced yet? To summarize everything I have stated so far, the animated series on Netflix created by Sony Pictures Animation has been greenlit, is officially listed for a 2027 debut, and is still keeping most of its major details under wraps. But we still do not have an exact release date, any details on the storyline and characters, any information about the voice actors, a fixed number of seasons, or even a trailer. The animated film has been reported, but it is also not officially confirmed. A director is reportedly attached to it, and there is a working title and a rather strange plot, but that is all we know about. The people at Ghost Corps Incorporated have teased that live-action films are being planned, but that is all we know about it. And I know we have waited a while, so all these projects being in development with no release dates in sight does seem a little disheartening initially. But as I said, I am sure fans would rather wait just a little longer and see a well-rounded production instead of something haphazardly put together due to pressure. Dominique Bizet, Netflix's director of animation for families and kids, has described the upcoming show as Ghostbusters like you've never seen it. I sure hope she is right. So this is where we are at, with a confirmed release window sometime in 2027, and a whole lot of things cooking in the background. Any future release will also depend on how well this animated series does, so there is a lot at stake. This franchise was built on the idea that the impossible is worth attempting, as long as you have a proton pack strapped to your back. We can only hope that the creative team takes a leaf out of their own book and tries to bring in that same zeal we saw with the original cast and crew in 1984. Please subscribe to this channel to be updated on all future announcements regarding Ghostbusters, as well as other Hollywood Legacy sequels. Thank you for watching this video.